All right. So I want to say good afternoon, everybody. This is Tiffany coming through here live in effect. So today I want to deal with the topic about Amanda Berry Smith, who was who was a former slave, and she also was an evangelist, and she opened up an orphanage institution for African American children who were abandoned or destituted. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, please do so. Make sure you hit the notification bell so whenever I come on, all that good stuff. So unfortunately, I am blocked from my Facebook channel. So normally I would have multiple streams going on. So I am restricted from my channel. I'm restricted from my page at the moment. So with that being said, I'm only dealing with the YouTube channel, of course, as I intended to do anyhow. But make sure you go ahead, hit that notification bell. Make sure you share this channel, share the video in the groups. Uh, Whatever you gotta do, share it in your chat, share it in the decor, whatever. All right. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. So what I do, particularly every week or like every other day, I deal with history regarding to African American or the Black in the diaspora, even those in the continent, because I think that us as a people who are of African descent should be able to gain some type of exposure to our history, our background, and what our ancestors have done, especially here in the diaspora. Also, I also deal with information about current events that take place or that's happening within our society. I get into other subjects about science, politics, social issues, anything of that nature. Only because I feel that it's necessary for us to do so. And so we got to keep up with the current events that's going on within our environment as well. But I want to go ahead and get started with Amanda Berry Smith. All right, so right here is a picture of Amanda Berry Smith. This is her. And the information can be found on WikiOne. So a lot of people like going to Wikipedia for other sources, but they can also go to Wikipedia and look for references at the bottom of the page to verify or back up information. So look at the primary sources and secondary sources, etc., etc. All right. So who was Amanda Berry Smith? So she was born on today, January 23rd in 1837. She was born on January 23rd, 1837, and she died on February 24th, 1915. Now, she was a former slave, and she funded the Amanda Smith Orphanage and Industrial Home for abandoned and destitute colored children. She was referred to as God's image carved in ebony. So she was born in Long Green, Maryland, a small town in Baltimore County. Her father's was Samuel Berry and her mother's was Marion Matthews. She was the oldest of 13 siblings. Her father was a well-trusted man, and his master's widow trusted him enough to place him in charge of her farm. After his duties for the day were done, Mr. Berry was allowed to go out and earn extra money for himself and his family. Many nights he would go without sleeping because he was busy making brooms and husk mats for the Baltimore market to make extra cash. He was devoted to the goal of freedom. After first purchasing his freedom, he made it his mission to buy his family's. After his family's freedom was secured, the Smiths settled in Pennsylvania. All right, now this is her childhood. Growing up, Smith had the advantage of learning to read and write. Her father made it a regular practice on Sunday mornings to read to his family from the Bible. Her mother helped her to learn reading before she was 8 and was sent to school. Unlike many other enslaved children and adults, Smith had the privilege of learning at an early age. She and her younger brother attended school at the age of 8. The school only held summer session, and after 6 weeks of attending, the school was forced to close. 5 years later, at the age of 13, they had been given another option of attending school. However, the school was 5 miles from their home, and they will only be taught if there was a time after the teachers gave the white kids their lesson. The Smith siblings felt that it was not worth traveling in the cold to receive lessons only if time was permitted. After 2 weeks of attending school, they dropped out and were taught at home by their parents and sometimes taught themselves. With only having 3.5 months of formal schooling, Amanda went to work near York, Pennsylvania as the servant of a widow with 5 children. While there, she attended a revival service at Methodist Episcopal Church. So basically, she was brought up in slavery. Both her parents were slaves. When her father earned his freedom, he was willing to purchase the family freedom. And there was time that she was able to go to school, and there was time when she was not able to go to school. And she was able to learn how to read and write. How? Because of her father. And he used to read the Bible. Remember, the Bible was the primary source that a lot of slaves had in their home. It was the primary book that most slaves learned how to read from, because they could not, because Christianity was the dominant religion. And by Christianity being dominant, the main thing they were exposed to was the Bible, more than anything else. Okay? And some read the Quran, but for the most part, it was the Bible. Because that's how they learned how to read. And that's all they had. So she grew up learning how to read the Bible. That's all she had. All right. So I'm going to continue. Adult life, Smith worked as a cook and a washerwoman to provide for herself and her daughter after her husband was killed in the American Civil War. By the time Smith was 32, she had lost 2 husbands and 4 of her 5 children. Attending religious camp meetings and revivals helped Smith work through her grief and avoid depression. She immersed herself in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Prayer became a way of life for her as she trusted God for shoes, the money to buy her sister's freedom, and food for her family. She became well known for her beautiful voice and inspiring teaching, and hence opportunities to evangelize in the South and West opened up for her. African American women in the 19th century took the way they dressed very seriously, and so did others. Being a preacher and traveling as much as Amanda did, she thought out her dress carefully. Wherever she went, she wore a plain poke bonnet and a brown or black Quaker wrapper, and she carried her own carpet bag suitcase. The appearance of women in the 19th century have been described as especially fraught with volatile meanings, as the line between seemingly overly sexual or appearing presumptuously dressed above one's station was a fine one. African American women struggle with receiving the respect they deserve, even if they dress the part of a lady. This was due to shadow stereotypes bred in slavery of wanton Jezebel and pious mammies. If free African American women dress out of their respective class, judgments would be made against them. So there was already a preconceived notion about Black women at that time. Okay, so it was already a preconceived notion that Black women were Jezebels or mammies. Okay. So Jezebel is the term for what we use today, thought. And mammy is a term for what they call women who speak out against certain things, dick handlers or pick me. Yeah. So those was the terms that were used back then. All right. And especially was very discriminatory towards black women because that's how society viewed black women. They thought that black women didn't have no values or they lacked values. All right. In 1878, Smith arranged for her daughter Maisie to study in England. The two traveled overseas and stayed in England for 2 years. On a journey over, the captain invited her to conduct a religious service on board, and she was so modest that the other passengers spread word the other passengers spread word of her. She next traveled to and ministered in India, where she stayed for 18 months. Smith then spent 8 years in Africa working with churches and evangelizing. She traveled to Liberia in West Africa. Now check this out. Smith also expanded her family by adopting 2 African boys. While in Africa, she suffered from repeated attacks of African fever, but persisted in her work. As a strong proponent of the temperance movement, both in Africa and the United States, she was invited by a noted temperance advocate, Reverend Dr. Theodore Lydiard Kohler, to preach at his Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian Church in Brooklyn, New York, then the largest church in its denomination on her return to America. Smith funded raised for her Amanda Smith orphanage and industrial home for abandoned and destitute colored children. It was an institution for the poor and friendless colored children. Located in Harvey, a suburban community south of Chicago, the orphanage opened on June 28, 1899. The institution provided a home for children to become self-reliant. Funds were sent by the Lady Negroes Friends Society in Birmingham, UK. Smith traveled many states to help gather money to support her work. Support for this institution depended on interracial cooperation for fundraising and advisory board, an advisory board. To raise funds for the initial costs, Smith enlisted Methodist interracial cooperation across the country. She was dedicated and put forth a lot of energy for the home. However, she soon met conflict with the orphanage due to many problems such as financial, a fire that destroyed the building, conflict between Smith and the staff, complaints from neighbors, and failed inspection by the orphan home investigators. 2 years following Smith's death, another fire broke out in the home, killing 2 girls. The building was closed for good. Later life and death. In the early years of the 20th century, Smith continued to visit various nations and gain a reputation as God's image carved in ebony. She retired to Sebring, Florida in 1912 due to the failing health. Her autobiography was published in 1893. Titled "An Autobiography: The Story of the Lord's Dealing with Mrs. Amanda Smith, the colored evangelist," containing an account of her life, work of faith, and her travels in America, England, Ireland, Scotland, India, and Africa as an independent missionary. She died in 1915 at the age of 78. So here's some more information. Right here at the very bottom, there's references. And there's the external link. Okay. So that's the story about Amanda Smith and her life. Now here's some more sources that could be checked out. So this source comes from a book called Turn the Pulpit Loose by Priscilla Pope Levison, which was written in 2004. So this is chapter 6. All right, and now right here in this paragraph, it says, in her new surroundings, Amanda attended a Methodist church and joined a class meeting. But the class leader, like the school teacher, made her wait until last to be taught. This practice made her late for preparing her employer's Sunday dinner, so she quit the meetings to keep her job. In 1854, at the age of 17, she married Calvin Devine. In a brief but telling description of her husband, Amanda wrote, he could talk on the subject of religion very sensibly at times, but when strong drink would get the better of him, which I am sorry to say was quite often, then he was very profane and unreasonable. Calvin joined the Union Army when black soldiers were admitted, and he never returned from the war. One of their two children, a daughter named Maisie, survived. Amanda's interest in religion was intermittent until intermittent until she became deathly ill in 1855. In her weakened state, she had a dream that she was preaching at a camp meeting. And then it says, then it seems I went to a great camp meeting, and there seems to be thousands of people, and I was to preach, and the platform I had to stand on was up high above the people. It seemed it was erected between two trees, but near the tops. How I got on it, I don't know, but I was on this platform with a large Bible open, and I was preaching from these words. And I, if I be lifted up, will draw all men unto me. Oh, how I preached, and the people were slain right and left. I suppose I was in this vision about 2 hours. When I came out of it, I was decidedly better. When the doctor called in and looked at me, he was astonished, but so glad. In a few days, I was able to sit up, and in about a week or 10 days to walk about. Then I made up my mind to pray and lead a Christian life. I thought God had spared me for a purpose. So I meant to be converted, but in my own way, quietly. I thought if I was really sincere, it would be all right. About a year later, on Tuesday, March 17, 1856, Amanda experienced her conversion in the basement of her employer's house, a Quaker family named Mifflin's. All right. So in 1865, Amanda married James Smith in large part because he expressed falsely so in order to win her affection, a desire to become an ordained minister. She had hoped to be a minister's wife, and through that position to find outlet for ministry. The disappointment of her marriage was grievous. For several years, they lived in a squalid conditions while working odd jobs in New York City. All three of her children died before they reached the age of year old. Constant conflicts between Amanda and James soured their marriage life. They married life, and they were living separately when James died in 1869. In the midst of her marriage travails, Amanda experienced sanctification on a September Sunday morning in 1868. She described the moment in these words: I seemed to feel a hand, the touch of which I cannot describe. It seemed to press me gently on the top of my head, and I felt something part and roll down and cover me like a great cloak. I felt it distinctly. It was done in a moment. And oh, what a mighty peace and power took possession of me. Not long after, she experienced her call to preach in a vision. All right, so skip down. It says beginning in 1878, Amanda preached for several years in various countries, including Great Britain and India. She then lived in parts of West Africa where she did some evangelistic work, but for the most part, she battled malaria, missionaries, and money worries. Her years in Africa were physically, emotionally draining, and she returned to Great Britain in poor health, weakened from malaria and recurring respiratory problems, hobbled by arthritis, and drained from constant travel. A haggard Amanda Smith arrived in Liverpool after 8 years of hardship, privation, and toil. Amanda was committed to education of children, particularly black children. While she was in Africa, she adopted two children, Francis and Bob. That one was 6 and one was 3. Her hope for both children was that they would become missionaries. Francis was left in the care of a family in Liberia, and Bob traveled with her to England and was educated in boarding school. Despite her financial constraints, she also provided education for her older daughter, Maisie. The educational project that consumed the last years of her life was the Amanda Smith Orphanage and Industrial Home for Abandoned and Destitute Colored Children, which located in Harvey, Illinois, a southern suburb of Chicago. When the school opened in 1899, it was the only protesting institution for African American children in Illinois. Amanda's goal were to train the children in the basic skills of cooking, cleaning, raising small farm animals, and gardening. Unfortunately, the school was plagued, as was Amanda's entire life, by a lack of funds. Despite a grueling schedule of fundraising and speaking engagements, she could not raise enough money to improve the school's living condition, which were perpetually cited as substandard by a state agency. At the age of 75, Amanda left the school and moved into a house provided for her by a wealthy manufacturer, George Sebring, in the Florida town he built and named after himself. She died there at the age of 78. So down here it talks about the double standard that she had to encounter. So Amanda carried the double burden of her race and gender. Yes. So there was discrimination at that time. There was heavy discrimination against women and their race. So, which makes them the minority. Okay. And to this day, black women are still looked at as minority. Not just because of their race, but because of their gender. So these things have perpetuated over and been passed on down from generation to generation. All right, so Amanda carried the double burden of her race and gender, and she did not fit in easily anywhere. She was accused by some African Americans of abandoning her race to cater to whites. At the same time, she experienced racism when she traveled and preached in white settings. In her autobiography, she recounts the curious looks that followed her when she, a black woman, traveled as first-class passenger on a ship from New York to Liverpool, England. The curiosity intensified when it was announced that she would hold services on the ship. How the smiles and whisper went around the passengers. The colored woman is going to preach. After the service, she knows a difference in attitude towards her. Oh, how it changed the spirit of the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen that had not even said good morning to me before came to me and thanked me for what I said, and especially for the prayer. She expressed her feelings about being a misfit between two races in a letter written at a time when she was in deep debt. I was ashamed to tell anyone it would look to white people like bad management on the part of those who were my friend. Then I knew what some of my own people would say and had said already, that I I was a kind of a white folks nigger. I knew they would say. That is just what I told you it would all come to, and can't tell me about white folks. They wouldn't see God in any of it. So I was here, yet despise a long list of racist experience. When she mused about her color, she concluded that she was content as she was. Yes, thank God I am satisfied with my color. I am glad I had no choice in it. For it, for if I had, I am sure I would not have been satisfied. For when I was a younger girl, I was passionately fond of pea green, and if choice had been left to me, I would have chosen to be green. And I am sure God's color is the best and most substantial. Amanda wrote very little about women in her autobiography. She referred more often to experiences of racism than sexism. She did not press for women's ordination when the debate on the topic erupted at the 1872 General Conference of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Amanda resolved not to participate publicly in the debate. She had the inward affirmation that her ordination was from God. Where she did encounter opposition against women's public speaking was in Africa from missionaries of other denomination. This excerpt from her autobiography recorded the opposition she received and her response. All right, and then go on to say, but the good Plymouth brethren were much disturbed because I was a woman. And Paul had said, let your women keep silent in the churches. So they had nice articles in the daily papers. Then they wrote me kind letters and bombarded me with scriptural texts against women preaching, pointing out some they wished me to preach from. I never argue with anybody, just say my say and go on. But one night I said I would speak on this subject as I understood it. Oh, what a stir it made. The church was packed and crowded. After I sung, I read out my text. Let your men keep silent in the church, quoting the chapter and verse. 1 Corinthians chapter 14:28, where Paul was giving direction so as not to have confusion, one to speak at a time, while the others listened, and then one was to interpret it. And if there was no interpreter, they should keep silent in the church. So I went on with my version of it. We had an excellent meeting, and the newspaper article stopped, and the letter stopped, and I went on till I got through. I have wondered what has become of the good Plymouth brethren in India since the Salvation Army lasses have been so owned and blessed of God. Their work has told more practically on the strongholds of hedonism than all that holy conservatism would have brought to bear in 1,000 years. Oh, that the Holy Ghost may be poured out mightily, then shall the prophecy of Joel be fulfilled. For are we not living in the last days of this wonderful dispossession of the Holy Ghost? So, all right, this is from a book called Turn the Pulpit Loose by Priscilla Pope Leveson. And this is chapter 6. All right, so also this is her autobiography. So this is archive.org. All right, it's called The Autobiography, the story of Lourdes dealing with Mrs. Amanda Smith, the color evangelist, containing an account for her work, her life work of faith, and her travels in America, England, and Ireland, and Africa. All right. So this is her autobiography here, which can be found on archive.org. This is the one that she put out in 1899, I believe. That's when it originally came out. So, yeah, this is her story. This is her life. All right. So, that's all I have for the information of today. That's it. Have a good one. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the notification bell and share the channel. All right. Peace.